Signore e signori, buonasera. Benvenuti. Welcome to Casa Italiana, Zerilli-Marimò at New York University for this special screening. It's actually the US premiere of L'occhio di vetro, The Glass Eye, by Duccio Chiarini. I just want to anticipate that at the end of the screening, there is going to be a Q&A between Duccio and two historians that I'm going to introduce immediately after the screening is over. Right now, I would like to ask Duccio to join me on the screen, and just to tell you a couple of things. You find the complete filmography, bibliography, if you click on the links in the website of the Casa. Just I want to say, he looks very young, and he is, but he has already gathered quite a few accolades. This is the second documentary he makes that wins the Festival dei Popoli of Florence, one of the most important ones, for Best Documentary. Yes. And interestingly enough, the first one was entitled Hit the Road Nonna, and in this one there is also Nonna as a sort of a hidden protagonist, but another one, not the previous one. So he has big nonna in his life. And we met Duccio when he came to New York for Open Roads to present his film, Short Skin. We liked what he did, we liked his personality, and we promised that we bring him back. And this summer, we saw the film for the first time. It almost never happens that I pick up the phone and call the director immediately after I see the film and say, we must see it. We must show it in New York, but it happened that time. And I'm very happy that when my colleagues here at New York University saw it, had the same reaction that I had of awe and surprise and amazement. So we are very, very happy to offer you a chance to see this film, not only for the cinematographic quality of the documentary that Duccio prepared, and you will see it's very original, the way in which it is made, but also for the content of it. And he deals with a very, very delicate aspect in Italian history and in Italian contemporary life, especially now that, as you know, the head of the government belongs to a neo-fascist party. I don't have a better expression to mention it. But there is this sort of obscure memory and the difficulty of dealing with these memories, some of them repressed or hidden, and very difficult to make surface. I'm not going to tell you anything more about the film, but maybe Duccio wants to greet you and tell you something about what you can expect. And then stay here for the Q&A, please.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you, Stefano, for the invitation. I have great memories of the first time we met here in 2015. I was with Short Skin, as you said. I'm really glad that I finally had the chance to bring this film a little around, because when it first came out, it was, of course, fall 2020, so everything was locked. And it was great to present it at the Festival dei Popoli, but of course, it's another thing to present it live and to have a reaction and to see a cinema like tonight. I think what is possible to say about the film already has been said by Stefano before. I would be glad to talk about it with David and Patrizia later and to answer your questions if you have some. It's a very personal story, but I think he also connects with a lot of Italian contemporary history, and not only Italian, because the idea that through the stories of people, normal people, through the micro stories, you can tell the bigger stories of a nation and of a community. It's something I strongly believe. And thank you again for coming, and see you later. Thank you.
And I'm asking Patrizia and David to sit. Maybe we put Duccio in the middle. So as I told you, the Q&A is going to be between Duccio and two historians, contemporary historians. We have David Forgacs here, who is the chair of the Department of Italian Studies here. He's an historian of contemporary Italy. His interests include the history of violence in Italy. His last book is Messaggi di Sangue, how political violence is intended to send messages, and it's a study of several episodes in the history of Italy between the unification and today. And David's other interests include documentaries, and He's the perfect match for this. And cinema, he's also the curator of the last Criterion Collection box dedicated to Federico Fellini, and he wrote an essay for each of the films featured there. And we have Patrizia Dogliani, who is a full professor of contemporary history at the University of Bologna. Her interests include also the history of fascism, but also the history of contemporary Italy, history of left movements, generational history, and history of public memory. She has written about 100 essays between books and articles, and her interests now are going in the direction of studies of the Mediterranean as an entity and a unit, and in particular, sort of comparative between Italy and Spain. You've done a lot of work on that, and talking about different kinds of memories in the two places. So we are in a very good place, and I think there is also going to be space for questions from the audience. So if you have questions, please, at the right moment, raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone to you. There are still a few free seats. Feel free to take them. If you could raise a hand if you have an empty seat next to you. So there is one there, one here, there. Everybody should be seated at this point. E poi sì, li prendo, guarda. Così. There are two here.
Oh, thank you. Do we share a mic? Yeah. Hi. Who's going to start? Me? I'll start? First, thank you, Duccio. I think it's a wonderful film. It's very moving. When I saw you for the first time this morning, we had a coffee. I feel like I know him already because I'd seen the film, and it's a very personal film. It's about personal history and public history together, but you do this very courageous thing of putting yourself in the film and telling your story, which is also your family story, so your story of how you discovered about your grandmother's dark past. So I wanted to start just by maybe commenting on the film and perhaps drawing you into that a bit. I am a historian, but I'm also a historian of film. And what I think is very striking about the film, very unusual, is that you don't make a conventional documentary. You've got all this footage from the Istituto Luce, which is involved in co-production of this, from your own family, this 8mm film that you show at the end of your grandmother, a lot of photographs. You could have just stood back and edited that and told some kind of detached narrative. And instead what we see, and this is the unusual thing, is you're actually going through the process of understanding, sort of unraveling this story about your grandmother and the rest of the family as you go along. So what we see is the process of you learning this. And, you know, I think you have the courage to put these very emotional moments on film, discoveries, when you choke up reading your great-grandfather's letter from the front. Why haven't you written to me? Why haven't got your... or that bit where your mother gets emotional because she says she read a letter from her mother and found out what she really thought of her, and you hug her. You know, these moments are incredibly touching, but they're actually about your process of learning about your family as you go through it. So I think that's very remarkable. The other thing I wanted to just say comment on, because it strikes me, and I don't know if it struck you watching this, is this attention to the places where memory is literally housed. I mean, memory, in the history of memory studies, one tends to associate memories with places. Memories are rooted in the houses we grew up in, or the places we moved to. And they contain their, like their household gods, like the Lares in, Roman mythology. Memories are in some ways embedded in these places. And of course, in your grandmother's house, but also in your mother's house, where she has this storehouse of documents, you've literally got these boxes of material, all the urine samples that you put to one side and the blood samples, but also this very interesting stuff, the love letters. And you sort this out, and as you sort it out, you're piecing together a history that involves you, because it's your beloved grandmother you're discovering about, but also your mother, your father, all these other relatives are somehow kind of materially put together as you go through these places. And what are the places? Is your grandmother's house, which we see at the beginning, at the end, in the province of Pisa, your mother's house in Florence, the hotel in Maderno, the house on the Lago d'Iseo and Lovere. These are all places where you materially, the memory is stored. There's that extraordinary thing your father says when you read out that letter in the hotel in Maderno, and he says something like, questa lettura in questa stanza è sconquassante. Right? He's really, the weight of the place that holds that memory is extraordinary as you read the letter out. The other thing I think is that because you're reading out on screen in front of camera these other people's stories, you are in some ways kind of ventriloquist of their voice. You know, their voice passes through you. So whether it's your great grandfather or your grandmother, or Ferruccio, this extraordinary kind of literary competence of this 15, 16-year-old who writes almost like an adult with a maturity of understanding, quite remarkable, and then becomes a dentist after the war. I mean, it's a lost literary talent there, unless he was writing when he was doing his dentistry. Anyway, I just wanted to say, the thing that I find is very unusual, because I work a lot with documentary and we have documentary filmmakers here, is this, this actually recording on film of the process of materially reconstructing the memory. And just one little point, although it might sound rather kind of film nerdy, you actually look at the, you see the materiality of the film. You have these luce film strips. You actually have the soundtrack running on the side. You see the frame edges. You see the sprocket holes. So you're even actually showing, this is a material object that we are, rediscovering. It's not, a piece that you clean it up as they conventionally do in documentaries made for television. You actually show the the material roughness of the image, and that's part of discovering your past through pictures. Anyway, so that's a kind of comment. I'd maybe like to invite you just to say something about the process of the filmmaking in reaction to that.
Thank you. I'm going to start from the end. While we were editing the film together with the editor Enrica, when the materials start coming in, the ones from Istituto Luce, which is kind of the national archive where public memory is built on, public visual memory in Italy is built on. We had a moment when we discussed, and we really wanted to have those that materiality of the film, as you said, the soundtrack, the dirtiness of it, because at the end this is what I was doing. I was really putting my hands and using my hands in all these things, not only blood and urine analysis from the 60s, but also all these different materials coming to me. And concerning the archives, I think you all notice there are 3 levels of archives. I mean, it's not easy to know this, but it's something that I like to talk about because, yes, I've been using private archives, which is mainly photographs, letters, and Super 8 footage, or whatever footage I had, also from the 90s, at the beginning especially, this HI8 camera I used to have and go around with. And of course the Istituto Luce archives. But in the middle there is this treasure that is a private archive that belongs to a family. Paolo Benvenuti is a well-known Italian director, and I came across, while doing my research, in his father's footage. So his father was one of the cinema operators that fascism was actually raising, inviting everyone to Rome to attend classes so that could be able to film and create archives of the cities. The funny story is that when they were going to Rome to study, what they studied was Soviet cinema. So fascist authorities were teaching these people how to film showing Soviet Union movies, which is something that, again, tells a lot about what we're saying here. Sorry? Yeah, Mario Benvenuti. And so when I found this, I discovered that Mario Benvenuti, the father, had left his footage saying to his son, whoever likes it. And so we had a completely free access to it. And it's very interesting because in the image, they're all set in Pisa. You can really feel the vibe of the era, the vibe of, what was daily life in those days. And I think this is what helped me a lot. I was telling this morning, David and Patrizia, there is one scene that I thought was going to be part of this film, but then didn't make it. On the outside of Pisa, there is this astronomic physics center called Virgo, where they try to detect and catch the gravitational waves that Einstein theorized. So it seems complicated, but it's not, so, because I learned, so it's not complicated. So basically, through this complex system, computers are able to understand what the contemporary time noise is, like earthquakes, motorways, planes, and by isolating this noise, they're able to see whatever little increspatura, I don't know how to say it in English, slightly almost impossible to understand movement of the space there is, and those movements that you can still record, these are the gravitational waves coming from billions of years ago. And this is something that immediately struck me because, as in this film, I was an historian. My whole effort in this film was try to suspend my judgment, to stop using my contemporary brain and trying to really create an incredible close relationship with those people that I never known, and also my grandmother, the grandmother I never known because she was 14, and trying to learn and try to understand what they were thinking through their letters, through their documents, through the image of people like them. And only in that way, I think it would have been possible to make an effort to understand what happened in Italy in those days without judging. And this is what I've been trying to do.
I think we need to pass it. We've got these only 2 mics. It's like a relay race. We have to passing it around.
Okay. So I don't want to repeat this, what already David said, but well, I like very much this way to present the big history and the national history and the family history. Not in parallel, but they are really mixed in all moment of your film. And I really like this idea to break a sort of silence, family silence, which is not only the silence of your family, but is part of the silence in Italy we had for a long time. I mean, not just after the end of the war, in the first, in the late 40s, but we know that in the 50s, everything was covered by a sort of absence of analysis and memory beside the parties, some monuments. Most of the monuments, the resistance monuments, were built in the 40s, and then you don't have, and movies, you have a sort of a vacuum of movies in the 50s, where your great-grandfather went back home in the early 50s, was already in sort of silence. Someone, I remember, I interviewed, I had in a Spanish movie, they asked me, but I was born 10 years after the war, and they asked me where the people around you were speaking about fascism. Of course, I was lucky to have a father in the resistance, very young man, but there is a minority. You, at a certain point, you feel different from some of your, in the school, from student mates, because they have, but probably because Tuscany is a little different from other regions, Tuscany, Emilia-Romagna, where the resistance was present. We know that fighting resistant patriots, partisans, they were a small, really small minority in Italy, probably 5% of the entire population at the time, and focus in some regions. But the people were asking me, but where did you speak to the people around you? And I remember no one was speaking about their past, about our fathers, mothers, or grandfather and mothers. No one in the 60s knew in some ways what the grandfather or the father have done during that time. So it was a sort of collective. Even if I grew up in Bologna, so we saw some parts of Bologna. Bergonzini, filmmaker, made this part on Bologna liberation, so was one of the city of resistance. But there was a sort of an incapacity to speak about this past. And so this is very interesting that you had a new generation, no? The generation after my generation, so mid-generation, started to speak and break this silence. Of course, you were in some ways very lucky. You have this kind of parents that they are sort of starring actors in the and the documentation you found and the own movies, so their own movies, which is something new in the last probably 2 decades. So there was this searching for own movies to recreate so the family history and the. And I was, this morning we were thinking this is a sort of characteristic of the Italian situation, that the people till very recently, they didn't move very much from house to another house. Probably in the States would be more difficult to have this collection of documents, papers, but the structure of the family, and the keeping in a house is something that probably can help Italians to reconstruct, to rebuild some past. I don't have a real, I don't have questions, but just comment. I was also thinking today, thinking of this kind of families where people were in the left, people were in the right wing, they were fascist, they overcome fascism. I was thinking of Antonio Pennacchi, a writer from the land reclaim areas of Lazio, and they made a movie from his memory, Mio fratello figlio unico, I remember from Lucchetti, where one brother was communist and the other was neo-fascist, in the same family in the 60s. So it's more common that what we think about the division, but as your mother said, but everyone respected each other. No, there was a sort of respect of the what they not what they have done, but there was a sort of affection and family link you have. Okay, maybe we can discuss more about.
I can answer to your no question.
Or some remarks.
Well, to me, the reason why after I struggled so much with this project, that for many different reasons was starting and stopping, was that I had in my mind it was clear that it was not just a story about my family, but it was a story about country. It was a story about the trauma. If we think sometimes we kind of apply the categories of the present to the past, but Italy as a nation came to life at the end of the 19th century. And one of the first experiences of Italy as a nation was the First World War. In the First World War, people from Sicily, Giovanni Verga writes marvelously about this, were taken to the Alps to fight for something they didn't even know what it was. And the following experience was fascism. Fascism, if we want to apply it to Italy as a living creature using some freedom, is an experience of the adolescence. And it's something that really stays. If you go, when I go to Rome, I always get very impressed. The architecture is there. And and I'm really shocked still to see the silence. And when you don't deal with the trauma keeps haunting you. The trauma keeps coming back. And this is what we're living. A friend of mine, a few weeks ago, again, maybe I'm lucky, wrote this beautiful letter to her students. The letter went viral, and she became the star of Italian politics. She's the director of a high school in Florence. But this is, again, one sign that the trauma is there. And as long as people will not go to therapy, the trauma will still be coming. Collective trauma. And I think it has to do, of course, with civil war and the atrocity of civil war. But so to me, this was something that it was very clear in my mind that I was just trying to keep my eyes focused on my family, but knowing that it was not just about us.
If I can add something, the other aspect is so the patriotism that is evident. Choices we discussed this morning. No, there was in '43, in September, the possibility to do a choice, no, to not remain neutral, but to go to one side or the other side. But this was also connected with a very different perception. What was the homeland? What was patriotism? Feeling. And it is evident in these young people. How did they decide to go to one side or the other side? And today I saw the discussion who is patriot in our country and how we define patriotism today. But I was thinking like some anti-fascist in the mid Vittorio IV, for example, in the jail as anti-fascist, started to read again Risorgimento documents or novels, because the Risorgimento was for them in a very different perceived as the fascists wanted to present the Risorgimento, Rebirth of Italy, as a nationalist. So there was already a different perception, an idea of history of Italy that made people deciding for one side or for the other side.
There is something maybe when I did one of the screenings of this film, I mean, this is something that for an American audience might be a bit, I need to explain a little better. There is one point when the war is over and partisans brigades are walking through the streets of the cities, acclaimed and hugged by the population. And first of all, it's very similar. They're all wounded. They're all dead in their eyes. Their looks are traumatized. And they're very similar to me, to the wounded people that came after First World War. And I chose those images for that. And on those images, there is a very patriotic song. They called La Canzone del Piave.
You use this, but not Bella Ciao. This is
no, but the problem is that I didn't use it. Okay. I found the footage with that music on because the people who made that documentary in '46, they said we need to regain the concept of homeland, of Heimat, as something that belongs to Italians and not to fascists. So we're gonna take back that song and use it for the partisans. But people now, they ask me, why did you put that song on it? It's a patriotic song. So there is a lot of complexity, and I think, to me, the most difficult thing for me was to navigate, because I had so many things. So I had, first of all, to decide which things I could to talk about and which others. And so the use of the words that I selected for my voiceover. For example, I described my great-grandfather as a kid that was coming out the schools where he studied patriotic from the Risorgimento from just few years before. And, you know, I really am trying to select simple words to navigate into this very, very complex reality.
Did you say the dead eyes were the populists or the partisans?
I didn't get the... Say it again, sorry?
The dead eyes in the populists or the partisans?
Well, I personally, I saw those dead looks, those traumatized looks, both in the people that were coming back from the First World War, and also in the partisans. There are when you go in those trucks and you see them, you can really see the trauma of the war.
That the fact there's a comment from the audience, I think, suggests to me it's probably time to open up to Q&A. Otherwise, we'll just talk to each other all evening, which is great. But I don't think that's what you want. So please, there is a mic, I think, going round. Is there a mic, or does? Yeah, there's one. So please speak into the mic because this is being recorded. So if you don't speak into it, we won't hear you on the recording. Yeah, there's somebody at the back. Oh, maybe start with the. Yeah, start with the back and then come forward. Ah, okay.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for this movie. It's a wonderful movie. I was flabbergasted. Not only it's very moving because it's your personal story, but it's also very informative, I thought. Your narrative, the way you tell this story, it's a period that I've read a little bit about, but I just feel I learned so much after watching the movie. So thank you very much. I have two questions. One is about Ferruccio. I thought that was such a phenomenal discovery, that the diary. I can't believe he was so young and he was writing like that. And I have the impression that his diary really added like a layer of lyricism, and it really enriched the narrative, because like the way he describes all those scenes is amazing. So maybe tell us a little bit more about him and what happened to him afterwards, what happened to his literary career. And then the second question is about the title, which I also think it's amazing, the title. Like, if you could tell us something about like the metaphors, like the fragility, the mutilation, blindness, all these metaphors that are kind of like embedded in the title. Thank you.
Thank you. So in 2012, when I started the documentary, something I didn't put because it was completely messy, the situation. Ferruccio didn't talk to me for 30 years because no one of them is alive anymore. But one of my mother's cousins he's a guy with a big talent in music, and he made music for a short film I did, but the music was completely wrong, and I didn't use it. So Ferruccio stopped talking to me. So when my mother, yeah, so when my grandmother died, we went to the obituary, and Ferruccio looked at me, and he came to me and he hugged me. And at first I thought, see, when something bigger happens. And then only months later I realized he had Alzheimer's, so he forgot about the music. So, it's what happens. And I think what happened with Ferruccio is he wrote the diary immediately after the war was finished, and I think he kept working on it for a while. He tried some. It was very, very long. I had to edit a lot. I used only partial portions of the film. But one thing that I did for him when we reconnected, because he forgot about the music, is that I sent his diary to, in Italy there is this museum of the private diaries in Pieve Santo Stefano. So I sent the diary out, and we never received any answer. And it's funnily enough, 7 years later, I did the film. Before I did the film, I met the director of the museum, and she told me, like, in 5 minutes, came out about Ferruccio's diary, and she told me, Ferruccio's diaries is one of the 2 or 3 documents that we give to people when they come and try to study what Civil War was, because it's such complex in the description. So yes, for me it was a treasure, and I decided to use it only when the trip with my parents start. And concerning the title, well, you kind of said it all. I mean, it was immediately clear since the beginning that it was such a strong metaphor for for everything, for the partial blindness, for the a partial blindness that not only characterized him but has consequences on the rest of the family, everyone. If it was not for Maria Grazia's heart and connection to Giorgio, I mean, maybe there wouldn't be a story. So it was really and also there was to me the symbol of the mutilation. Germany's love with Hitler has many different roots, but one of the roots is Versailles Treaty of Peace, and how unfair was against Germany, how this unfairness managed to develop a sense of rage into the population. Of course, many other reasons, and it's too complex here, but the sense of mutilation. In Italy, the First World War is called the Vittoria Mutilata, like the people, but because they felt that there was no space for what they did so it was really representing many things at the same time. It was just a perfect image.
Let's take another question. Yeah, you have a mic there already. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very touching that in the midst of civil war, love conquered all in your family. It was very touching. Let's hope that it's going to happen in this country, because we are also in the middle of a civil war. But compliments, it was very, very, absolutely great, your documentary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please, you can just keep passing the mic around. I think we probably need to set a time limit, and maybe take 5 more minutes, and then I'm afraid we're going to have to cut off. Yeah.
I like the film very much. I think it's very powerful. I'm a documentary filmmaker myself, and I dealt with that period of Italian history, and I really appreciate your efforts to try and deal with something very difficult, very complex, and doing it with an honesty, intellectual honesty in it, even though your family was in the middle of it. My family went through a similar experience, with my grandfather being a fascist who went to the First World War and continued to be a convinced fascist even after the war. My question has to do with the fact that Italy clearly has gone through a period of amnesia, historical amnesia, that continues to some extent today. So that's why films like yours are very important and very necessary. You were mentioning Germany before, and Germany went through a denazification process that was much more thorough, much more serious, much more powerful than what happened in Italy. And in your film, you talk about one of the members of the family who was kept away from his family for a number of years, and then he comes back. Can you talk a little bit, particularly considering the audience of tonight, which is an American audience, and may not know some of what happened after the war? I think you did a great job of creating the context of why Italians learned to love fascism, why it was important for them. But what happened after the war? The amnesty, to what extent it was a real amnesty, and that can explain also why it's still so difficult to talk about fascism today.
Well, I try to do my best in such a small time. If there is one scene when I'm reading documents, and in the scene I read the witnessing of my grandfather that says, I was there the night when they decided to execute the partisans. Those documents are from a trial that was in 1950. I put it there for many reasons, not only because of what he did in the war, but also putting the date 1950. I was trying to express, the war is finished, but trials start. There is an immediate, and again, when Ferruccio is wandering, lost, he knows that he needs to hide somewhere. People were executing other people because they knew they had no faith in justice. I'm in this Freudian period, but I think it's funny that my father dreams that they could all swim together in the lake, whether they could not swim at all. My grandmother, being so beautiful, she had to stay locked in that flat for 7 months because they would remember her. It were very tough years, especially the first year, and things kept going that way. I don't know when it started, but at some point it was just easier to say that partisans won the war. They didn't. There were very few. South of Italy didn't experience the Resistenza beside Naples. So it's very complex, but there were a lot of trials. There were a lot of traumatic experience, and maybe also they had seen so many things that it was just better not to talk. Maybe an next chapter could be interesting that way, about the 50s, what happened in the 50s, why we didn't talk about it in the 50s. But I think also people learned, like when you get out of a war, there was to rebuild the country, and for many different reasons. I mean, I think this is not the right place to discuss, but also the fact that minor realities of resistance, with the fact that Cold War took over, there was communism, and so Partito d'Azione, that was an important soul of the resistance, disappeared. And so kind of resistance went to the communists. And so things in the narration, I think also there is a problem in the narration. When you narrate a story, you have to make it simple. So by making it simpler and simpler and simpler, at the end, Italians were partisans and we won the war. We didn't, because as Americans would know, we have American military base in the country. Why? Because Americans won the war, not Italians. Shortly.
I think probably we're going to have to close because... What? One more. Yeah, sure. If somebody's waiting to come in. Did somebody holding the mic? At the back? Can you take... Yeah, thank you.
Yes, congratulations again. I just have one curiosity. The Canzone del Piave that you did the version with the trumpet. Who did that? Did you have it written by somebody?
Oh no, I guess I answered talk about the music a little bit. So I normally work with this composer, and I know he has a very good taste, and I wanted to recreate some kind of atmosphere of Italian music in the 20s and the 30s. And so starting from some music that I found over the footage, I play with him. And I talked with him and I asked him to recreate that kind of, those melodies. And because the Canzone del Piave was so important in that footage where I found, we decided to evoke something a bit mythical and nostalgic, and about the resistance experience. And so just trumpet was, for us, the perfect choice for that sequence. Thank you.
Okay, I think we should wind up. I just wanted maybe one more comment. One thing we didn't say is this thing about the kind of why some people became anti-fascist and why some didn't. I mean, that's a whole complex thing, but your film does actually touch on it indirectly. The story of Giorgio Piovano, who, like many teenagers, was a fascist, but all these other young men who at the Scuola Normale, like Alessandro Natta, who became a leader of the Communist Party, Carlo Azeglio Ciampi, they had the fortune to go to a prestigious university where they were exposed to sort of readings of things, even though Giovanni Gentile was directing it, which opened up perspectives. If you were lucky enough to go to the D'Azeglio Liceo in Torino, and have an anti-fascist teacher, it would open up that thing. The great-grandfather didn't have that opportunity. He fought in World War I, he became an ardent, patriot, he hated the communists, and that was his trajectory. Your grandmother followed that, right? And, the sister happened to go the other way. But, a lot of these family histories are to do with, educational opportunity, the chances to have certain encounters, and, I think one understands why some people became fascists and others didn't. And some people were these irreducible fascists. Anyway, the film, I think is a, great picture of how that happens. It really is, very, very powerful personal version of that.
If I can add, certainly there was a big discussion when these young people, especially students from university, became real anti-fascist, Ingrao, for example, or other that generation. Some memory trying to explain that they became before the war, but most of them, was the war who moved them from the fascism, especially the war the Italians were not winning in 41, 42. And they move to a different, and this is like Giorgio. It's very clear what Giorgio, even if it was a critic,
Good. So we're going to let you leave now.
Okay.
I just want to, can we please thank Duccio again? Really. Wonderful.